Well, good to see you.
Nice to be back.
Yes, I remember our talk very clearly on the sideline of Chinese Premier's visit to Australia.
It seems like a long time ago, but it was only a couple of months ago in June. Yeah.
A lot of things to catch up, but I really want to start by asking you, Chinese consumers are the most important element to see in the Chinese market. How is Australian business looking at the significance and also the sophistication of Chinese consumers today?
The growth in the middle class and demand for high quality, safe, healthy, value for money goods and services is driving demand for many categories of Australian goods and services. Of course, everything you eat, we're obviously very concerned about how it's produced, its sustainability, how healthy it is. And Australia has a strong attractiveness to Chinese consumers for the reliability and safety of its agricultural, food and beverage products. Of course, we're all very happy to see wine come back into the market, and that's a product category that's very attractive to the Chinese consumer. But beyond that, you've also got the visitor economy in Australia is incredibly important. Tourism. China used to be the #1 source of tourists for Australia, and Tourism Australia is working hard to have them come back to that level. And then in the provision of medical services or financial services. So across all the categories, this demand from Chinese consumers is driving opportunity for Australian businesses and Australian exporters.
There are a lot of generational changes in the mentalities of Chinese consumers. I mean, you've been living here in China for decades. You, through your family members, through your work, I'm sure you have got to see the real essence of it. Some say a few years in China is already a generation. This is so true even these days. So how do you see, on the one hand, the growth of the economy becoming more stabilized, but at the same time, the mentality of consumers changing still rapidly, and the landscape is ever evolving?
Yeah, I think so when an Australian executive arrives in China for the first time after a number of years, do you know what one of the first things is that they notice? The number of electric vehicles that are present on the road, how comfortable they are, how attractive they are from a pricing point, and how you can readily now the sharing economy is so prevalent, whereas it wasn't when I first came to Beijing, more than 10 years ago. So I think Chinese consumers are quick adopters of new things, but then if you're not providing something that is what they want, or someone comes and does it better, quicker, cheaper, then you're out. So it is often said that it's important to be in the Chinese market. It's a crucible of innovation, and that includes product innovation, because that environment of competition, that environment of the consumers looking at what you're doing and making those decisions drives you to be better.
Australian businesses are not only working with their Chinese partners as the channel to sell their products, but also to establish a joint, something like a joint brands or sub-brands related to their businesses with their Chinese partners. So this is a much more diversified way of cooperation. So how do you see these more innovative ways of looking at the taste of Chinese consumers and make sure it is always catching it and providing it the first minute? How does that work?
A very famous Australian brand of wine, very successful in the China market, importing made in Australia wine. But in recent years, they've started also producing wine in China under their brand as a made in China wine. Very well received by Chinese consumers.
With local grapes?
With local grapes. Very well received from local consumers, and that's one model that increases, I suppose, from a business perspective, the resilience of their product offering in market. But from consumer perspective, they can see that this global brand also has a product offering that's made in China, which helps to develop the local wine industry as well. So from an ESG social license perspective, that's helpful for that brand.
Food and beverage is only one part of China-Australia trade and economic relations. There's a big chunk of it that has to do with raw materials, with some of the best that Australia could offer to the rest of the world. So tell me more about where is that cooperation and how would that serve the best interests of Chinese consumers?
Right, so obviously export of resources from Australia to China is a big part of the trade relationship. In early 2010, I think we had urbanization in China driving demand for particularly iron ore. And now we see, as China looks to increase supply of cleaner source of energy, that Australia, as a country that's relatively closely located to China, has been supplying LNG since the first shipment in 2006, and so is well placed to help China as it looks to source more cleaner forms of energy from different sources around the world. And that, of course, is important too, because energy is a huge cost in the production of things that consumers ultimately buy. And then another, you said the new phase. I think now we've got this many years of collaboration between Chinese companies and Australian companies in the resources sector, turning those relationships into looking at ways to decarbonize the different value chains. Of course, collaboration in the production of renewable energy is quite important, again, because of the efforts that China's made in research and development of technology and in manufacturing scale, renewable energy is now down to a price that's competitive with fossil fuels. Similarly, in the production, for example, of green hydrogen, China's investment in the technology, in the manufacturing capacity, again, helps in producing that very cost effectively. And all that, China and Australia are now working on ways to decarbonise the steel production, the value chain for production of steel. Those are just a few examples of how we're moving into a new phase of development, with decarbonisation being a top priority for Australia as an export of resources that contribute to the way they use contributes to carbon emissions, and China is the biggest producer of steel globally.
Electronic vehicles really develop very fast here in China. You see the fierce competition among the manufacturers. Having said that, though, this has created quite a stir in the international discussion as well. You see some economies trying to portray it as quote-unquote overcapacity, even though the reasons for giving that phrase can be quite insufficient. Well, on the other hand, many in China also notice Australia very supportive in the common cause of green development. For example, in welcoming electronic vehicles, including those from China. So how do you see attitudes like this and approaches like this taken by Australia so far would be of reference to Chinese consumers as well, and also for future cooperation between the two sides in the green sector?
I think the foundation of this is both countries' commitment to achieve carbon emission net zero goals. This is a common goal of both countries. Second is the complementarity between the economies, which is the fundamental basis for that collaboration. It's the bedrock and the driver of that collaboration. China, on one hand, has this is a leader in the technology in electric vehicles and sustainable transportation. Its scale of production is such that the cost is very attractive. Australia, on the other hand, doesn't have a car industry. We import vehicles, and that's also the state of development of the electric vehicle market is earlier than other markets. But essentially, there's not any incumbent producers who are affected by, and therefore that complementarity drives why the Chinese EV brands are achieving the successes they are in the Australian market. I mean, ultimately, it's down to the consumer to decide between a fossil fuel car, a hybrid, or an electric vehicle. But Chinese companies, their value proposition is resonating with Australian consumers. And I think that complementarity is something that's underwriting and driving that.
But on the other hand, Vaughn, I do want to invite your advice. When you are sitting where you are as the chairman of China-Australia Chamber of Commerce, how do you distinguish noises vis-a-vis realities and separate them so that businesses can have sound decisions and meanwhile consumers could have real access to information?
So part of the role that we perform at a Chamber of Commerce is to provide facts and to facilitate people seeing with their own eyes. 百闻不如一见. So Australians are quite practical, and as you said, the consumer makes a decision between the alternatives on the market based on cost, based on other factors, without being impacted by the noise that you talked about. But certainly in that process, we have a function to play, business has a function to play to educate consumers about the facts relating to the performance of the cars, relating to their function, to support the buying decision by the consumer.
Vaughn, what a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.